Act 6. The Silence. So why don't we know about it? Why isn't the Wilhelm Gustloff taught in schools? Why isn't there a blockbuster movie? Why, when most people think of maritime disasters, do they think of the Titanic and not this? The answer is complicated. First, there's the context. The Wilhelm Gustloff sank in January 1945. The war in Europe would end just 4 months later. By the time the world learned about the disaster, it was buried under an avalanche of other horrors. The liberation of concentration camps, the Battle of Berlin, the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. The sheer scale of World War II's death toll, over 70 million people, made even a tragedy of this magnitude feel like a footnote. Second, there's the politics. The sinking was kept secret by the German government during the war. They didn't want to spread panic. They didn't want to admit the evacuation was going so badly. After the war, the information was controlled by both the Germans and the British, who had access to classified records. The full story didn't emerge for decades. Third, there's the moral complexity. The Wilhelm Gustloff was not simply a passenger ship. She was armed with anti-aircraft guns. She was carrying nearly 1,000 military personnel, including U-boat trainees. Under international law, that made her a legitimate military target. Soviet Captain Marinesko wasn't committing a war crime. He was doing his job. But does that justify the death of thousands of women and children? The question has no easy answer. For years, Marinesko's actions were debated. Was he a hero or a war criminal? The Soviet government wasn't sure either. Despite sinking the largest ship in German history, Marinesko wasn't given the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Instead, he received the lesser Order of the Red Banner. He was demoted to lieutenant, dishonorably discharged in October 1945. It wasn't until 1990, decades after his death, that Mikhail Gorbachev posthumously named him a hero of the Soviet Union. Finally, there's the simple fact that the victims were German. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, sympathy for German suffering was in short supply. The world had just learned about Auschwitz, about Treblinka, about the millions murdered by the Nazi regime. It was hard to mourn Germans when the evidence of their crimes was still fresh. And so, the Wilhelm Gustloff disappeared. Not just beneath the Baltic Sea, but beneath the collective memory of history. But some never forgot. The survivors carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. They met at reunions, shared their stories, tried to make sense of what happened. Ursula Scholz-Ressas, the young woman who'd been saved after clinging to her sister, spent decades speaking about the disaster. I was hoisted up, and I hugged the first sailor and said, "Thank God I'm saved." Jürgen Dennel, the boy who'd heard his mother scream, never forgot the short boom, the chaos, the cold. Heinz Schoen, another survivor, devoted his life to researching the disaster. He interviewed survivors, pored over records, wrote multiple books. His work remains the definitive account, meticulously documenting the names of the dead, the timeline of events, the failures that led to the catastrophe. In 2003, a Discovery Channel documentary used computer analysis to reconstruct the sinking. The simulation showed the ship listing hard to port within 7 minutes, sinking completely within 60. Small memorials exist, in Germany, in Poland, at the site of the wreck in the Baltic Sea. But there's no Titanic-level recognition, no Hollywood epic, no household name. The Wilhelm Gustloff remains what it has always been, the worst maritime disaster in history that almost no one knows about. If you're liking my content, please consider subscribing and torpedo that like button for more about history. Act 8. The Wreck. The ship lies at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, approximately 450 feet below the surface, off the coast of what is now Poland. For decades it was untouched, a grave for thousands. In recent years, divers have explored the wreck. It's largely intact, lying on its side in the cold, dark water. The swimming pool, the corridors, the cabins where children slept. The Baltic is a strange sea. Low salinity, cold temperatures. These conditions slow decay. Wood survives longer, metal endures. The Wilhelm Gustloff is remarkably preserved. Polish authorities have declared the site a war grave. Diving is restricted. The dead deserve their rest. But nature doesn't care about human designations. In 2024, scientists made a startling discovery. Marine life is thriving on World War II explosives in the Baltic, including the wreck of the Gustloff. Mussels, algae, fish. Life finding a way even in the ruins of death. It's a strange kind of redemption, or maybe just indifference. Epilogue, what it means. So what do we do with a story like this? A tragedy so immense it defies comprehension. A loss of life so vast it seems abstract. 9,000 people. More than 4 times the Titanic. Gone in an hour. And most of the world doesn't know their names. Maybe that's the real tragedy. Not just that they died, but that their deaths have been forgotten. Lost in the chaos of a war that killed millions. Overlooked because they were on the wrong side of history. Dismissed because the ship was technically a military target. But every one of those 9,000 people was a person, a name, a life. The mother clutching her children, believing they were safe. The U-boat trainee, barely 18, who never fired a shot. The elderly couple fleeing their home, hoping to see their grandchildren one more time. The women's naval auxiliary, asleep in the swimming pool, killed instantly by the second torpedo. They all had stories. They all had futures. And they all died in the cold, black water of the Baltic Sea on January 30th, 1945. The Wilhelm Gustloff is a reminder that history is not clean. It's not simple. The good guys and bad guys are rarely so clear. War doesn't distinguish between the innocent and the guilty. It just destroys. And sometimes, the worst stories are the ones we choose not to tell. But here's the thing about forgetting. It doesn't make the story less true. It doesn't erase the lives lost, it just makes it easier to repeat the same mistakes. Maybe that's why the story matters. Not because it's shocking, not because it's tragic, but because it forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that war destroys everyone. That suffering doesn't care about politics or nationality. That the worst disaster in maritime history can be forgotten simply because it's inconvenient. The Wilhelm Gustloff sailed into the darkness with 10,000 people aboard. Fewer than 1,500 came back. And for 80 years, the world has looked away. Maybe it's time we looked back.
Final note. The Wilhelm Gustloff disaster killed more people than the Titanic, 1,500, the Lusitania, 1,198, the Empress of Ireland, 1,012, the Britannic, 30, the Sultana, 1,800, the Atlantic, 585, combined. And still, most people have never heard of it. That's the real tragedy. End.
If you're liking my content, please consider subscribing and torpedo that like button for more about history.